This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. So this video started off, I was going to make a video for a Patreon member, Carsten, who was asking how I would use 4-cable method with the Boss IR2 and the HX effects so that you could put the overdrives before it, and modulation, and the delay and reverb after it. And I kind of filmed that and I'll put that in this video, but towards the end of that I kind of thought, well, why would I do that anyway? So the cool thing is that if you have something like the HX effect or the HX stomp, something with a signal chain in it already, you actually don't need to worry too much about this effects loop type stuff. So what I would do personally is just insert an effects loop where you want it in your signal chain and plug your IR2 in. And then I thought, well, why would you want a 4-cable method setup? And the reason that I could come up with would be that if you're using this as kind of the thing that you want to hear your audio through, whereas I'm using the HX effects as sort of like the master device, and that's where my outputs come from. If you're using the Boss IR2 as the place where your outputs come from, like the phones or the outputs themselves, then you might want to connect it in 4-cable so that you have the delays and stuff coming through your headphones or into your audio interface, right? This is also capable of a stereo effects send and return, which I'm not going to cover here because it's out of my wheelhouse. The first time that I used 4-cable method would have been with my Mesa Boogie Nomad amp, and I'm just going to set it up traditionally here and sort of show why it's a thing, in case you were wondering. So here I have a Dumble style amplifier, the VHT D50. We'll turn that on. And what we typically would do would be we'd have some sort of like modeling style devices, what I associate with the principle of 4-cable method in general. So we are going to take our guitar cable, and that will go into the input of our device. I'm going to have a problem here because I don't think that's going to stretch far enough. But I like to have like sort of these cables labelled and stuff. I've got an actual old loom that I used to use. So, yes, right. The send of our effects unit goes to the input of our amp. Okay, that's part one. The return of our effects unit goes to the send of our amp, and then the return from the amp is plugged into the output of the HX effects in this case. Then you put your effects loop on your HX effects wherever in the signal chain you would like it to be. So for me, it's after overdrives and before delays. So then the delays will be in the loop of the amp and the overdrives will be in front. And I can change channel and make loud pops. And the delay is unaffected by the preamp of the amp. That's kind of the benefit of full cable. In this case, I've got drives. So that's kind of my main use case for full cable method, is if I've got an amp with an effects loop that I'm going to be wanting to switch the channels of, that would be one reason to use full cable method, right? Now, let's jump into the IR2 because I'll show you how you can wire it up, but I don't think if you've got a signal chain like the HX effects that you necessarily need to worry about this. What I would do is just put your digital amp and cab in the signal chain where you want it. Place it like you would the amp and cab within your HX Stomp or HX Effects or whatever, and just put stuff that you want in front of it, and put stuff that you want after it. And that's for me if I'm monitoring out of the HX Effects, if that makes sense. Okay, so you've got your IR2, you've got your HX Effect or some other device, or you could think about this in other ways. This could be like a Friedman IRX or anything effectively with an effects loop in it. Two things with an effects loop in it, you can connect in full cable method. So what I'd suggest is, if we're doing a kind of modeling thing like this, that you plug your outputs in kind of first so you're not going to get confused. So essentially what we're doing is that this is our amp and cabinet. So you imagine this would normally be like your mic and cab. It's also a good idea to have kind of like different colored cables for this sort of thing, and maybe label these things up, because in the heat of battle, this sort of thing is really easy to get wrong. Super easy. So guitar in to the HX effects. That's connection one, right? Our HX effects send, I'm going to use this grey. So on the other end of this cable here, that's grey, right? This goes into the input of our amp or pedal. Okay, our HFX return goes into the send of our amp or pedal. Okay, then we got one more connection to make because it's 4 cables. We so far have 3, right? The return, well, the effects like output, the main output of your effects unit then needs to go into the return of your IR2 in this case. Okay, so that's our connections in place. So we've got, follow the grey. The grey goes into, so send into our main input. The return goes into the send of our main thing. And then from the return of here, we go into the output of the HX effects. Now within the HX effects itself, we are going to need to have an effects loop. And what I think about is that the effects loop is effectively where you're putting your amp and cab. So anything in front of the effects loop will be sent from the send to the input, right? Anything after will be sent into the effects loop. And why that's important, we can move this effects loop to the end, so move block. If I was on my drive channel, well, I'll just switch channels for you. So this is more important if you were switching channels. Effectively, I've got my thing happening. The delays essentially get super, you know, brought up in the mix, because when we go to our drive channel, it's way more compressed and a different tone. So this is a way that if I go back and put the effects loop between, so that the delays happen afterwards, the delays and reverb, their mix is not kind of changing, and I'm not having to, you know, panic about that too much. So that's the basic methodology there. And this is a preset that I was using. So I've got a clean. What's kind of neat with this is that I've got the HX effects set up with like my Eric Johnson type settings. So we've got clean. Dirt. And then all like so that's how I would set that up. I hope that is somewhat helpful, Carsten. Yeah, just in your HX effects, you're going to need a mono effects loop. Is another thought that I've just had though, do we even need to bother with this 4-cable method stuff? So another option, because we've got two digital things like this, what I would do would be to set this as my kind of output device, and I'm plugging into here still, and I just straightforwardly use this input and the output. Okay, and yeah, then that I think would be more for me how I would use this, and then I preserve stereo activity. Let me just check for sure that this is going to work. Got our send going into our input, our return going into the output. So we got some of the benefits still, but we still put stuff in front and behind. So you might not even need the 4-cable method at all.